to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rach.
And I'm your co-MC, Rich. And I'm excited because we're bringing back on Sean Tompkins. Sean, how are you doing? Welcome back.
I'm doing well, thank you. I appreciate you having me back.
Since you're a returning guest, why don't you share with us what PBTA game you're most excited about right now, other than your own, and why?
Definitely one that's on my radar right now was a Kickstarter recently, which I managed to sleep through just because I was sort of busy with my own crunch time on my own stuff, but that was Stone Top by Jeremy Strandberg. Mm-hmm. The reason I'm excited about that is because I've been sort of eyeballing the preview materials that have been floating around for, it seems like, many years now.
Mm-hmm.
At least a couple, maybe like 3 or 4. And they just looked super slick, very well put together. I love sort of the evolution of fantasy PBTA and the moves. I love the idea of this focus on an Iron Age village, and I'm always interested in like a location as a character that you and your other players can help manage and develop. So all those things push my button pretty well, so I can't wait for it to go maybe into pre-order via the Pledge Manager or whatever when they get to that phase, so I can jump in, see what the final product looks like.
Very cool. Well, why don't we jump on over here and read a sitch. Read a sitch.
In Read a Sitch, our guests discuss a specific issue of play, an observation about things going on in PBTA spaces. Sean, what did you want to talk about with us today?
Well, we talk about solo gaming, which is the space in which I live to some degree, or the space I'm known for, but we talked about that in our last podcast. Mm-hmm. But for this one, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about oracles generally for PBTA and RPG play, which are a tool that's often used in solo play, but I think also generally applicable to GM-led games, GM-less games of all sorts.
Okay. For those of us who don't live near Delphi, how do we make this go? What are you talking about, Sean? These oracles things.
When I say oracles, I'm using a little bit of a term of art for random prompts, basically, right?
Okay.
A simple oracle would be a names table, which we're all familiar with, right?
Yeah.
Because coming up with names in the middle of a game is probably the most dire challenge any of us will ever face or could ever face. So having a handy table of names is a lovely tool to have, whether you're a GM or a player or whatever, right? So that's a super simple example of what we'll just throw into that term of oracle. There's also oracles which are more abstract creative prompts. So tarot cards, which people sometimes use as an RPG tool to help interpret an event or introduce something related to a storyline, or even use as like a character sort of generator, right? You put down a field of cards and interpret that to help construct a character. There are storytelling dice that have icons on them. You can roll a few of those, look at the symbols, and interpret that for the current situation or question you're trying to solve, and use those as a creative prompt. And then there's tables of all sorts, right, that are a little bit more abstract than something like a names table that might give you information for a location or a person or event that you can roll on to help inspire something in play. Or as a GM tool, when you're just planning a session or building a world, whatever the case may be, right, you can use these random generators to help flesh things out, help fire up your creative engine, et cetera, et cetera.
So those are real general oracles, but what if you are looking for something more specific?
You know, if you think about the tools we generally see in RPG books, random tables are a popular thing. They're fun to roll on. They help inspire the nature of a setting. A lot of times you'll have tables that help, especially for like setting books and things like that, for things like random encounters, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can roll on a table and generate an encounter based on that. That's an example of a more specific oracle, right? You might see a location table in an adventure or within a setting book that gives you something very specific, like, I'm in a forest, what do I see? And you roll up on a table, and the table has an entry for, it's a placid pool in a forest glade in which a Rusalka dwells and pines for their lost love, right? That's a super specific response.
Mm-hmm.
The cool thing about that is that specific response doesn't require a whole lot of creative energy for you to interpret, right? You've got a fair bit of information to bounce off of there, but it's not so specific that there isn't room to play within that space. What is the nature of this being, right? What is some of the more specific features of this location? What does the encounter look like? How does it take form? Like all those things are still unknown and to be interpreted and discovered in play. But that's an example of a more specific oracle that if you're interested in exploring a story about a lovelorn rusalka, you're all set, right? You can just jump in and do that. But the bad thing is if you're not particularly interested in that sort of encounter, it's like, maybe you roll again, or maybe you just think of something else. A more abstract oracle, and this is something in my own games that I use, I sort of am playing always with that balance of specificity and abstraction that gives you a little bit of something to go on, but isn't so specific that it's hard to fit into your current situation or even what you're hoping for in terms of a play experience, right? So in that same situation, a more abstract oracle might be something like just 2 words, inhabited water. That may lead you down that same path of there's a rusalka living in a forest glade pond that is pining for a lost love, but it might also lead you to there's a dangerous snake in there or something like that, right? If you're more interested in a perhaps perilous encounter in that moment. So what you're doing with all these oracles is interpreting them in a way that fits your story, that supports the kind of stories and situations you want to explore, whether that's a lovelorn rusalka or a dangerous serpent. The nice thing about that, with that level of the more abstract things, is that, again, there's more room for you to sort of take that ball and run with it and have a better fit for your situation. But it also requires a little bit of sort of creative work for you to sort of brainstorm on that and interpret what it means. The more specific oracles, like super detailed encounter tables and things like that, give you a more fully fleshed out response, but there's less room for you to sort of creatively bounce off that and have it fit your situations and sort of preferences at the table.
Other than encounters, which I think you make a really good case for the value of those oracles in surprising you as a GM in what they may encounter. But what are some other ways to use oracles around an overall RPG? Maybe one that isn't necessarily encountering new dangerous monsters.
Generators are great for world building, whether it's a sort of a GM activity, right, of preparing for a session or a campaign, or whether it's a more PBTA-like experience of doing a shared world building session. A lot of times, just sort of like the creative effort that's required for that sort of thing, it can be a little bit draining sometimes. You get sort of like into the sort of decision paralysis of having a blank page, if you will, when you're working together to define a world. A lot of PBTA games do a great job of having prompts, of course, right, to sort of make that a more guided exercise. But there's still a lot of sort of blank spaces to play in there. So what generators can do, especially the more abstract ones, is just give you that sort of initial prompt that you can then sort of bounce off, think about, discuss at the table, and then expand on. So if you're trying to generate a city, right, in a fantasy location, right, maybe you've decided your campaign is going to be set there, so you're sort of like at the table talking about the city. Roll for something like a verb-noun combination, like dismal water. Okay, so this is a port city. It's down on its luck for whatever reason. The people are downtrodden. Sorting to picture something sort of Dickensian or Victorian, right, with a lot of slums or lower class areas where people are living. And then pretty soon you're just sort of riffing on that and what that means for your campaign, right? Versus just having the blank slate of, okay, we need a city. What's the deal with that city? So just a couple of words there, or rolling some dice that have the pictographs on them, or tarot cards, or some sort of inspirational tool will get you going. There are also people use oracles a lot in solo play because they're sort of a GM emulator. So obviously they're a tool there, but I think they're a good tool for GM-led games. I think they're a good tool for co-op games. In PBTA, a lot of times there's this ethos of turning questions back to the players, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a player is looking for details of a particular space or situation or something like that. They'll ask the GM about it. The GM will say back to them, well, what do you think? And sometimes that's a little bit of a deer in the headlights syndrome sometimes for players where it's like, I don't know. So let's say your party's encountering a city and you've got a character who's maybe like has some underworld connections or something like that. And you've made some sort of move, whatever system you're using, that gives you the capability to introduce a connection in this place, right? So you ask the GM about it. Okay, who do I know here? And the GM says, well, I don't know. Who do you know here? And you're like, I don't know. Instead of just sort of getting stuck on that, make a roll on a generator to give you a little bit of a more abstract notion of a character. That'll get the conversation going a little bit more. It'll jumpstart that potential creativity block and move things along. And it also, they tend to generate things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of on your own that sort of go beyond maybe some of the typical tropes you might be more inclined to just introduce because they're easy, they're top of mind, right? It'll introduce more sort of creative solutions sometimes. And because, especially the more sort of abstract oracles, they will sometimes uncannily sort of fit a particular situation or conflict you have going on in your story in ways that seem a little bit almost supernatural at times, just because the way creative interpretation works, you create connections with abstraction that suddenly introduce all this surprising nuance. So it's a really fun area to play around with just introducing these random tools at your table. There's huge varieties of options, especially with solo role-playing becoming popular. Like all those tools become tools not just for solo role-playing, but for GMs to help inspire their world building, for at-the-table experiences, to help inspire situations and events in gameplay, and to help the players as sort of a creative step up when they're feeling blocked on a particular, answer in the middle of play. You can just take a moment, roll for it, see if there's some inspiration there, and then play to see what happens from there.
I have to say, Sean, I really love the idea of oracles forcing you out of a comfort zone. Like, I have certain default responses in situations as an MC and also as a player, and the idea of oracles that will nudge you into unexpected, unexplored new territory is really cool. I think that's definitely a positive aspect for the oracles that I hadn't considered.
Especially even for GMs when they're sitting down to prep a session. I know PBTA is typically going to be low prep, but even with relatively low prep games, a lot of times the GM is going to be sitting down, making some notes, trying to remember what happened last sessions, doing some outlines for characters and things like that. So just taking a minute, using these random generators will often sort of steer you away from sort of the more obvious paths into some surprising new opportunities that just can create, in the end, more creative, exciting, unexpected, delightful games for your players, potentially.
Another thing I was thinking about as you discuss the oracles, I've recently been playing some from the quick start for Urban Shadows 2nd Edition, and there's a faction turn now where the MC rolls dice and they do stuff in a downtime phase. And I'm like, man, interpreting this stuff out, it would be interesting to have faction, like oracle-based faction reactions that go along with that. I'm digging that idea. I think I'm going to have to make that happen for my next faction turn.
Yeah, if you take there's sort of verb-noun combinations are often sort of the popular sort of abstract oracle. If you look at the Mythic solo GM emulator system, that's sort of a foundational tool within that system. I have similar things with an Ironsworn. And it'll just give you like an abstract verb down that do a really good job of sort of representing an action and a target for something like a faction. And it can lead you down some cool sort of unexpected capabilities or plans of a particular faction that sort of go beyond the more simple connections that you've established in your campaign, potentially introduce some surprising aspects.
Open your brain. All right, in Open Your Brain, we will be talking with Sean about a creation of his. Open Your Brain is where we talk about a specific game or mechanic. And Sean, I'm very excited to have you on to talk about some kind of Starforged. Tell us about this. What's going on?
Starforged is what I'm calling the sci-fi standalone evolution of the Ironsworn tabletop role-playing game. Ironsworn is a tabletop role-playing game that came out in 2018, supports solo, co-op, and traditional, what I call guided play. I think it's mostly been sort of whatever level of popularity it's achieved, I think has been a lot due to its solo play capabilities, as well as the sort of the co-op small group GM-less mode. For Starforged, I'm sort of taking it's, the simple pitch is it's Ironsworn in space if you're an Ironsworn fan. If you're not an Ironsworn fan, it's a role-playing game of human-centric science fiction. Takes place on a distant frontier. It's focused on characters who undertake sworn vows. They explore uncharted space in their starship. They build bonds with those they meet in their travels. The tone of the game is sort of the sci-fi I love, somewhat inspired by 70s sci-fi, 80s sci-fi. So it's a bit retro, it's a bit gritty. Things like Outer Rim, Star Wars, Mandalorian, original Star Wars trilogy. There's a little bit of Alien in there in terms of some of the retro tech and grittiness and some of the isolated suspense that comes in the setting. There's some Firefly in there in terms of sort of the workaday. You've got your starship exploits that are tied to that. And there's a fair bit of sci-fi gonzo in there for things like that, emulate maybe more modern things like Guardians of the Galaxy, where maybe in your travels you find a planet or maybe you find a planet-sized amoeba. Either thing is not necessarily equally possible, but certainly possible.
You had me at Star Wars.
I wonder why Rich is so excited.
Bouncing in my seat.
Mandalorian is definitely a touchstone. I think a couple of reasons. One, the Mandalorian has a very sort of Western aesthetic, which sort of speaks to a lot of the inspiration from the original Ironsworn, where there's a lot of sort of spaghetti, Western, Seven Samurai sort of influences in there, right? In terms of sort of the lone wanderer and coming across a village and running into various troubles there that they end up solving. So that same sort of aesthetic, I think, carried into the Mandalorian, right? Of this guy sort of traveling around the universe, having some overarching story, but also sort of the problem of the week that he's solving in a particular place. Just the quest-based nature of that. And I think a lot of this sort of the Mandalorian aesthetic as well as like the super sort of, it's almost a vow-based culture really that he was a part of. So I was working on Starforged while I was watching that, and I was wondering at times who was ripping off who, but I was pretty sure we were on an independent path, but all the same.
What mechanics are different in Starforged compared to Apocalypse World?
There's a few things. One is the sort of explicit support for solo, co-op, and guided modes. So if you're a single player, the system will help you drive a narrative through a combination of the way the moves work in Apocalypse World more broadly and Starforged more specifically in terms of like giving you triggers, giving you outcomes, right? That then sort of drive the next steps for your character in the situation. That works the same in co-op mode. If you're just there with another person or two without a GM, you can collaborate together to help build that story, interpret moves, use the oracles that are built in the system to generate locations and situations, etc. And then guided mode is just, somewhat traditional GM-led play, but there's a lot of room in terms of for the GM and in terms of where you set your dial for narrative authority. You can be very loose and really let the players have a lot of authority in terms of how they interpret the outcome of their own actions and events and locations and things like that, and just sort of be there to help respond when they do have questions, to fill in the blanks, to introduce new challenges when there's a failure, for example, to understand what happens next. So all those things are supported by the system, but sort of the default, the assumed is no GM, and then just the GM gives you the flexibility. The GMO gives you the flexibility to take a lighter or heavier hand as you like in terms of how you're handling the narrative. It's got a different dice mechanic than standard 2d6 PBTA. I know that's not necessarily universal to PBTA games, but this dice mechanic is a d6 called your action die rolled against a pair of d10s, which are called the challenge dice. You're trying to ideally beat both those dice, beat the value of those dice individually to score a strong hit. Weak hit is beating one of them. Miss is not beating either. And progress tracks, which are, think of them as clocks if you're familiar with Blades in the Dark and the Forged in the Dark games. They're somewhat like that, but there's a little bit of a risk-reward mechanic built in to where the progress tracks define your progress on something like a quest or an expedition or a fight, and you sort of decide when you've completed the mechanical and narrative impetus to roll against this clock to determine how this is resolved, whether it favors you or doesn't favor you. Those are pretty pervasive to the system. And then there's some other things. Legacy tracks or a experience mechanism that are built into the system. In Ironsworn, experience was solely based around completing quests. In Starforged, because there's 3 pillars of play, which are quests, discoveries, and bonds, there's experience rewards that go along with each of those, and those are tracked along what I call legacy tracks. And then one of the other main distinctions from standard PBTA, instead of using playbooks, there's a la carte character building through what I call assets, which are individual resources, individual roles, character talents, abilities, things like that. You just sort of pick individually and then build your character out of that. So think of them like splicing and dicing your own playbook together.
Oh, that sounds so cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot. So much. What in Starforged is your favorite move and why?
One of my main goals with Starforged was to create a sci-fi game that really leaned into exploration. It's something I wanted to explore, especially for solo play, of just this idea of heading out into uncharted space and what do you find there, right? As well as the idea of sort of carving paths through unexplored space and starting to build safety through that. So I built in new exploration moves as part of Starforged that didn't exist in Ironsworn, and sort of a inherent exploration game loop, if you will, that has its own sort of subsystems and things like that. And that's, I think, my favorite part of the system is just the stuff you discover as you head out in your starship, whether you're just heading out or whether you're following some sworn quest of your own, and the travel is somewhat incidental to that, but still somewhat of a focus and play just because you need to find a path from point A to point B. So there's a move in the game called Explore a Waypoint, which is the trigger for that is when you divert from an expedition to examine a notable location. So it's something that happens in the midst of making another move, undertake an expedition, where you're sort of resolving those segments of travel. But if you run across some interesting location or interesting event, you can use this Explore a Waypoint move, which has a little bit of a risk-reward mechanism, where you explore a waypoint, you might find something beneficial, mildly beneficial, you might find something mildly dangerous or harmful, or you might make a discovery or confront chaos, which are sort of the big events that are rare but can trigger entire new sort of aspects of the setting, entire new storylines when you do encounter them. And they also just give you instant experience for encountering those things. And it doesn't matter if you're making a discovery, which is ostensibly a positive thing, or confronting chaos, which is ostensibly a negative thing. Both of those things are going to award your character with experience, so they're fun to encounter, and they have some cool random tables you can roll on to sort of interpret what just happened, what did I find here, which try to take into account, the bulk of sci-fi tropes into a couple of tables, so they're kind of fun to roll on.
Nice.
I don't know about you, Rich, but I'm certainly excited to explore a waypoint. So why don't we go to our next session and play out a little bit of Starforged?
It is time to act under fire.
Okay, Sean, Act Under Fire, we get a little demo. I know we could play this amongst ourselves, but you're here, so you might as well guide us through.
Yeah, guide us.
Let's call me somewhat of a facilitator for this, because I think I'll lean on you guys a little bit for interpreting some of this, especially as we play with, since we've had a discussion about oracles, we might as well find an opportunity to roll on some oracle tables.
Sounds fun.
So I think it might be good to put you out in space on your starship. That's a big focus of the game. All characters have their own starship. That's sort of your home away from home in Starforged. And we'll say you're in the midst of an expedition. So you're traveling through interstellar space to a distant ice world. We'll call the place Karn. So what time-sensitive mission are you on? Why is it so important that you are traveling to this ice planet?
Is this something that we should be rolling on, or is it something you want us to speculate on?
You may speculate, or you may say, I don't really know. Can we check an oracle and see what it says?
I don't really know. Can we roll on an oracle and see what it says?
Sure. It's kind of fun to take an abstract oracle for something like this, I think, and sort of interpret it, since we have so many potential opportunities. We know so little about the situation and things like that, so it'll give us a lot to play off. So why don't we roll on action and theme? That's a verb-noun combination that we can bounce off and see what this mission is all about. So if you can give me a couple D100 rolls, a couple of percentile rolls, we'll see what we come up with.
Rach, why don't you roll the first D100? I'll roll the second.
I'm going to roll it on the table list. So I have 82.
And I have 08.
82 and 08 is risk, blood. Does that bring anything to mind? Let's say there's a settlement on this planet of Karn, and you are transporting something there. You're carrying some vital cargo there. So what does risk, blood bring to mind in terms of the nature of this mission and the nature of your cargo?
It says risk blood. It's going to result in some form of violence.
Or we're smuggling something into a particular settlement that their overseers don't want them to have.
Ooh, I like that.
Let's say you're smuggling in some weapons for a faction that's under the heel of a corrupt authority on this planet.
Those darn rebels we happen to love so much.
Yep.
They pay well, thus we love them.
You are on the way to the ice planet of Karn, and in Starforged, the way interstellar travel works is that think of your ship as a stone skipping across a vast galactic pond. You fly at incredible faster than light speeds for a short time, but you can only do that for a few hours, and then you have to stop and recharge that drive. So you reach a waypoint, you hang out, wait for the drive to energize again, make another faster than light trip to the next segment, and so on. But let's say you've just rolled a weak hit on your latest undertaken expedition roll as you're in the midst of this journey, which means that you're facing some sort of peril as you arrive at this latest waypoint. So you've managed to accrue some progress on this journey, but unfortunately, there's something at this waypoint that is going to create some danger for you. So one thing I like to do when I reach a waypoint is just sort of roll to see what I see, like what is the most prominent or visible or notable object at this waypoint. Waypoints on interstellar journeys tend to be at what's called an anchorage. So they tend to be around sort of large interstellar bodies and things like that. So we can roll on a table that's called the space sighting table. It's just like, what do I see at this particular location within space? Again, that would be a percentile roll. If somebody wants to give us that, we'll take a look, see what's there.
I got some dice here. So that would be a 60.
60 is going to give you... Interesting. That's going to give you descriptor plus focus, which is instead of giving us a more specific response, such as a planet or a starship or a spaceborne creature, it's going to give us something we once again need to apply a little bit of creative energy to interpret.
Okay.
So we're going to get a couple of D100 rolls. We're going to see what we find and interpret it. Now, we know have a couple of facts of our situation, right? You're smuggling weapons to this distant planet. We know there's some faction that doesn't want you to be there. We don't have a lot of other information about the setting, so this may be somewhat of a blank slate interpretation, but we'll see what happens.
I'll do the first one. Rach, you do the second.
Sure.
06.
Okay, that's ancient. Interesting.
And here comes the second. 79.
79 is space-time, ancient space-time. So space-time being the physical manifestation of reality, potentially, right? Ancient sort of stands on its own.
Wow, that could go Gonzo Star Trek time anomaly if we wanted.
And we got to think about this. We know this
like
is
a Guardian of Forever.
We know this is a peril, so we want to think of it in the context of something that is potentially dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
could it be running into a battleship that hasn't been seen for several centuries?
Ghost ship. Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
I like that a lot. So, imagine you're coming out of what is called Eidolon space here. Your Fasten Light Drive is called an Eidolon Drive. And your ship shudders as you descend to normal speed. All the sensor data starts to spin up to look around. You hear little beeps and things like that. And out the cockpit viewport, you see this massive ship. And this ship predates anything you are familiar with. It, in fact, dates from the Exodus, which is the event that brought your people to this distant galaxy in the first place. And it is more massive than any ships that exist that are functional today, because this is a thing that carried hundreds of thousands of people from your old home to this new galaxy. And it is vast and dark as it now looms in your cockpit windows.
Oh.
Is this ship something that we've heard rumors, legends about, or is it a completely new discovery for us?
I'm not sure. Let's ask the Oracle and find out. What do you think the chance is that you've heard about this as some sort of rumor or mythical element? Would you say it's likely? 50-50 unlikely?
I would say likely. Like a type of rumor you'd hear at a bar and you wouldn't put any stake in.
Yeah, I like that.
Why don't we roll for that then? Just roll a percentile die. Since that's likely, we'll say 26 or greater is going to be, we're using a move called Ask the Oracle here, where when you have a yes or no question, you can you can let the Oracle decide based on setting a general chance.
83.
All right, so that's a yes for sure. You guys this is a rumored ship. It was lost when the Exodus fleet first arrived in the Forge, and spacers sometimes talk about seeing the ship in their travels, but generally giving it a wide berth because it's said that it's a cursed ship and that the spirits of the people aboard are forever looking for others to join them within their eternal voyage through the dark.
Never thought I'd live to see the Zelbinian. We have to board it.
Look, if we board it, didn't you listen to the rumors that guy told us after we bought him 3 rounds of drinks? He said,
yeah, but that was after the third round of...
Oh, but he said, if we go on it, then you have to be part of the ship and you join its endless voyage. And I mean, it might be cool to go to the end of space-time, but look, we got a whole lineup of gigs we got to get to.
I hear you, but that's the kind of tales the scavengers say so that they can get first claim on it. Come on, it's dead. Look at it. It's a dead ship.
Oh, first claim. You know what? I hadn't thought of that. No, you're totally right. First claim. But it's like fairies. Don't eat any food or drink, okay?
Right. Of course not. Who would do that? And then we will pilot the Muckamuck, which is what I've now named our ship. Because I heard once that somebody was described as a high muckety muck, and I thought, oh, that means they're really important. And therefore I named our ship the Muckamuck.
So how are you approaching this ancient derelict?
Kind of like a Chihuahua would head towards something large and dangerous, ready to scatter at any moment.
I have such a strong visual for that.
Okay, it doesn't seem like that's a particularly risky or uncertain situation. So we'll just say that happens. And I envision your spotlight sort of strobing along the side of this dark ship as you look for a way to dock with it. And you see a docking port along its flank that looks to be compatible with your own ship.
Yeah, no force shields, though.
Maybe it's a reconstruction.
Nah, it's the real deal. Look at it. Look at those scoring. Look at the marks. This thing's decrepit. I bet on the interior, though, there's got to be something worth scuttling. We're going to have to wear vac suits, though. No way that they've got environmentals inside.
Yeah, I'll go get the device. I imagine like there's like a device to sort of lay first claim as soon as you step in, you slap it to a wall like a little tracking beacon.
Nice.
I'll get the vac suits when I get the tracking device.
And I'll bring the muck into the hangar, and hopefully the docking clamps can hold us so she doesn't fly away.
Do things rust in space?
Who even knows?
Okay, so you bring your ship alongside. You settle into the docking clamp. There's an audible echo through the ship as the clamps take hold. A slight bump, but otherwise smoothly done. You suit up, head down to the airlock. Do you enter this derelict ship?
It's a derelict ship, right? I think we go in like bosses.
Oh, yeah.
What's the worst that could happen?
Got a bad feeling about this.
Hey, if you want first claim, you got to act like you want first claim.
Okay, let's do this.
So you go inside. We happen to have some handy oracles for derelict ships, actually, in Starforged. So I think what we'll do is just sort of envision the initial impressions of the interior here using that oracle. Let's get a couple of D100 rolls. We'll roll on the first look table. We have structured the oracles in Starforged to sort of give you your initial impressions, like the things you see at a glance, and then as you explore further, interact with things, you can reveal new aspects of them. So we'll just see how awful this thing is just from an initial inspection.
You want to take point, Rich?
Yeah, here he goes. That is a 23.
23 is deteriorating spaces. So obviously this place has suffered the wears of and rigors of time, or maybe it's unnaturally deteriorating. And we get one more. We'll see what else it says about it.
38.
Excessive cold.
Appropriate.
Yeah, checks out.
I sort of imagine the interior of this space as frosted over, right? As you move your lights along the bulkheads and spaces of this interior passage, there's a glimmering, almost blinding glow from all the frozen metal, and there's little particles of ice that are floating through before you. If you were not in a suit, you would probably be frozen in an instant, but luckily you're relatively safe and comfortable in this. And I think that accounts maybe for the deteriorating spaces too, is just this place has maybe been exposed to the depths of the cold of space for years and is the worse for wear because of it.
I'm imagining that when my character slaps on that first claim device, the piece of metal wall kind of falls through a little bit just from it's deteriorating from years of frost and buildup, and then like kind of shuffle over and put it to like something that looks like a little bit more like a support beam.
Okay, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Let's head in. Maybe there's some parts of this that are sealed off. Might be in a little better shape.
Well, we could always sell it to a museum.
Yeah, sell the remnants. I'll toss a tether, and then we'll head deeper inside.
Let's just generate a location.
What is that? A few more percentiles?
Yeah, why don't you give me 3 percentiles, because we're going to figure out what zone you're encountering. So what area of the ship? Are you in a living area or engineering area? Like what is immediately beyond this access point? And then we'll generate a feature or encounter of that area. I kind of want to play off your weak hit and probably give you apparel in this wherever
fun.
you're traveling here. So we'll see what happens.
Rach, roll twice, I'll
All right,
roll
let's
once.
go for the zone. Yeah, I have 43.
I have 15.
Okay, 43 is going to give you a living area. So you're moving through an area that is like quarters, probably communal quarters, right? Because this carried thousands of people. So I imagine huge berthing areas where everybody slept through the long voyage to the forge here. So, and then what did you come up with, Rich?
I got a 15.
15 is going to give you, you're first within a kitchen area. So you're moving through like a galley. Knowing how many people they had to feed here, it's probably a pretty vast space. And I'm looking at the peril table for living area. And I see signs that unwelcome invaders now inhabit this place. One of our options here, which the nice thing about these Oracle tables is they're not just sort of random things, but they're also tools for just glance, pick one as little inspiring prompts, right? So what I imagine is that, contrary to your expectation, there is a group of other scavengers that have already laid claim to this place. And as you come around a corner through this galaxy, you see a group of them standing at a doorway, guns raised, lights playing over you. A leader, clear leader, steps forward and says, "Yeah, a couple of sneaky spaces here coming to take our claim, eh?"
Well, somebody didn't stake their claim properly.
Yeah, that's the kind of response that gets a shot.
I know, I'm good at those.
Sean, that was cool. What a neat use of oracles for a spooky Space Hulk. I love it. So, Sean, as we release this episode, your Kickstarter for Starforged is still ongoing. We'll have a link for that in the show notes. Were there any particular parts of the Kickstarter you wanted to highlight for folks as they listen?
I think one of the main advantages of the Kickstarter for backers is that you actually get access to the preview edition, which is 230-page rulebook, all the print and play materials you need as well, worksheets, asset cards, etc., to be able to play the game on the day you back. So it's pretty much a fully featured, playable version of Starforged. The moment you back, you can get access to that backer-only post and get in there and start forging your own galaxy.
Awesome. And if our listeners are looking to follow more of your work on social media, where can they find you?
IronswornRPG.com is the website where you can find Ironsworn. It's a free download, the core game, and then links to all the other various Ironsworn family of materials. And then I'm on Twitter at Sean Tompkin. That's generally my most sort of active social avenue, as it were.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for coming on Plus One Forward, and best of luck with the rest of your Kickstarter.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.